Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vishveshvari Mata ki jai, Bole Baba ki jai. We'll go on with chapter 43 from the Devi Bhagavatm, retold by Ramesh Menon. Muni Veda Vyasa continued. When Madhata became king after Yavanasva's time, he conquered all the earth and was called Sarvabhauma. He married Sasa Bindu's gorgeous daughter, Bindumati. They had 2 sons who were to become legends in their own time, Puruksha and Muchakunda. Puruksh's son was Anara, who was known as Brihadasva. Brihadasva was a devout king. His son was Haryavasa, who became a realized soul, and Haryavasva's son was Tridhanva, and his son was Aruna. Thus far, all the kings of the house of the sun were God-fearing men of deep dharma. But Aruna's son, Satyavata, was a spoiled, self-indulgent prince and a philanderer. Once he saw a young Brahmana woman and, smitten by her beauty, abducted her from her very wedding. All the Brahmanas of the city came together to the king to protest. They came into the court lamenting loudly and cried repeatedly, "Alas, we are ruined. Alas, we are ruined. O king, your son has ruined us." Aruna asked them, "What has my son done to you, holy ones?" They said, "Our child had already been given to a Brahmana as a Brahmana's wife, but your prince took her from him before the sacred fire." The righteous king called his son and cried at him, "O you disgrace to our ancient house, to what have you stooped? Leave my kingdom. Let me never see you again." The prince moaned, "Where shall I go, father? You have behaved like a Chandala. You go live among the Chandalas." Saryavata went sadly from his father's kingdom and began living amongst the Chandalas of the forest, truly like one of them. His heart burnt with resentment most of all against the king's Kalaguru, Vishishta, whom he held mainly responsible for his father's high-mindedness that had fetched him this wretched exile. Satyavata was also convinced that Vishishta could have prevailed upon Aruna not to punish him so harshly, but that Muni had said nothing. Some years went by, and then Aruna himself, grief-stricken at what he had done to his son, left his kingdom and went to live in the jungle and perform tapasya, so the sin in the family may be forgiven. Indeed, Indra had not sent any rain to his kingdom for 12 years. It was in those days that the king Kashuka, who would one day become the Brahmarshi Vishvamitra, left his wife and children in the very forest that Satyavata lived in and went away to the banks of the river Kashika upon the Himalayas to sit in relentless dhyan to have the power of a Brahmana. A famine came to that forest, and soon Vishvamitra's wife, in desperate straits, her children, of whom there was a fair brood, had nothing to eat, and she had no notion how to feed them. Then, hardening her heart one day, she took her eldest son, tied a rope around his neck, and went out. It so happened that Satyavata, who was out hunting in the forest himself with his bow, saw the strange sight of a noble-looking woman walking through the forest with tears in her eyes and a boy going before her, around whose neck she had tied a rope, the end of which she held in her hand. Stirred by the sight, Satyavata accosted the woman and said, "Who are you, beautiful one? Why do you lead this boy about with a rope? And why is he crying?" She replied, "I am Vishvamitra's wife. My husband has gone away to the mountains to do tapasya. My children are starving, and this is my elder boy. I have brought him to sell him so that the others can eat. The rope is so he won't run away, and he is crying because he knows what I mean to do." Tears sprang into Satyavrata's eyes. He said to her, "Untie the rope and go back to your ashram. Until your husband returns, I will bring you food from the forest every day. I will leave it hanging on a tree near your ashram." She did as he asked, and then on, that child was known as Galaba, since she had tied a rope around his throat. In time, he became a great rishi. For that day's torment, when his mother led him around like a beast on a sail, left an indelible print on the child's mind. Satyavrata kept his word to Vishvamitra's wife faithfully, and indeed he felt he now had something to live for every day, as he would hunt wild boar and deer, rabbits and pheasants, skin and pluck these, and leave their meat on the tree as he had promised. Vishvamitra's wife fed her children with what the prince brought her, and they grew into strong and happy children. But one day Satyavrata found no animal to kill in the forest. In some despair that he would have to break his word, he plunged through the forest in search of game. Now, Vashishta still kept an ashram in that forest where his disciples lived in Dhyan. The rishi also kept some cows in his hermitage. Satyavrata, in his hunt, arrived at the edge of Vishvamitra's ashram and saw a plump white cow cropping the grass. The prince had never forgiven Vashishta for not stopping his father from banishing him. Now when he saw the cow and knew it was that rishi's animal, he did not hesitate but killed it with an arrow. He dragged it away into the forest, skinned it, ate part of it himself, and took some meat for Vishvamitra's wife and children. They never knew it was the flesh of a sacred cow and ate it quite happily. But when Vashishta heard what Satyavrata had done, he came in a rage to where that prince lived and cursed him. "You have killed my precious cow like a pishaka. You have killed her and eaten her flesh. You abducted a Brahmana's wife from her very wedding. For these 3 crimes, let there be leprous marks on your face like a demon's, and for the 3 shankus you shall be known as Trishanku. Let all the world know your true nature, that you are a Pishaka." At once 3 leprous marks appeared on Satyavrata's face, and he became Trishanku. Pishakavata was upon him. He was like a demon, violent and terrible. But it seemed the curse made Prince Satyavrata a more devout man than ever. He began to worship the Devi Bhagavati with the mantra of 9 letters. One day Satyavrata decided that he wanted to perform the Puraskarana Homa, in which a deity is worshipped with oblations, mantras, and burnt offerings. He came to the Brahmanas of the forest, and bowing deeply to them, he said, "I beg you, my lords, be my Ridviks in the yagya I want to perform. I am a Kshatriya and a prince. My name is Satyavrata, and I am Aruna's son." But the Brahmanas cried, "You are a Pishaka, and your guru has cursed you. You have no right to the Vedas or to their rituals. You may not perform any sacrifice." Satyavrata was stricken. This seemed the last straw in his tragic life. He decided to do away with himself. He piled up a pyre of dead wood and then bathed in the river to purify himself. Finally, he lit the pyre and stood before it, chanting the Devi's mantra before he immolated himself. Suddenly, the Devi Bhagavati appeared before him, mounted on her lucent beast, bright herself as 100 suns. "What are you doing, Satyavrata?" cried the Devi in a voice like a rain cloud rumbling. "How can you abandon patience like this? Never think of killing yourself, Kshatriya. It is a sin worse than murdering a Brahmana. Why, tomorrow your father's ministers will come to this forest to fetch you home, and Aruna will bequeath his crown to you. Your father's time has come to embark on a life of tapasya, and yours to rule a great kingdom. With that, the Devi vanished before his eyes like a dream, and the pyre Satyavrata lid had burnt down to ashes. Trembling and with tears in his eyes, the prince sat on the ground in shock and elation. To his amazement, he found his Pishak Avata had left him. The Devi had undone Vashishtha's curse and blessed him with a radiant Kshatriya body again. Meanwhile, in Ayodhya, King Aruna had an illustrious visitor. Narada arrived in his court and told him all that had transpired with his son. Aruna began to cry. He said, "How my child has suffered. First I turned him out in anger, then he lived like a chandal in the forest, and finally Vashishtha cursed him to Pishavata. And now, O Muni, you tell me that he is about to kill himself when the Devi appeared to him. I have sinned more than my childhood. Let him be brought back at once, and I will make him king." So even as the Devi had predicted, Aruna's messengers arrived the next morning in Satyavrata's ashram with the message that his father begged him to come home and be crowned. Giving thanks to the goddess who was the cause of his good fortune, Satyavrata went back to his father, sobbing in delight to see his son. The father clasped him in his arms and would not release him, but kissed him over and over again. Finally, making the prince sit next to him, Aruna discoursed to him a little on the dharma of a king. Your highest dharma is to be devout and a bhakta. Never lie or walk down the path of evil. Never be influenced by men or of dubious characters, but keep truly wise men near you, brahmanas and rishis, and listen to their advice. Your senses, my son, must be your slaves. That is the first enemy a king must conquer. Himself, the rest will be easy. Ministers must be consulted on every important decision, but none of them must be trusted completely. Keep your enemies in your thoughts constantly. Never forget even those who you consider the least of them. Every enemy, even the least, is dangerous to a king. Your spies must keep a close watch on your friends and your enemies alike. Lead a sparse and aesthetic life, for only when the material life is simple can the inner life be rich, and only with a rich inner life can a man be a king. I know you worship the Devi Bhagavati. Narada Muni told me how she saved your life. Always keep her next to your heart. Pray to her every day at all 3 sandhyas. Invoke her blessings for everything you do. For the Devi delivers her bhaktas from sorrow and evil, and he who drinks the charamrita, the water with her feet were bathed, will never enter a mother's womb again. Never transgress dharma, my child, and remember that the brahmanas who know the Vedas and the Vedantas are like gods on earth. Consult them always, revere them, support them with gifts of wealth and lands, cows and gold. But if a brahmana is not learned, do not give him so much. Just give him enough to fill his belly. But worship the learned brahmanas, for he is like the fuel out of which the fire that is the kshatra's power comes. The brahmana's power flows everywhere, my son. No king who opposed a wise brahmana ever triumphed. I mean to make you king now, for my time has come, and I must renounce the world. With tears in his eyes, Trishanku prostrated himself at his father's feet, and all was forgiven between them. Aruna clasped his son to him, then called for the brahmanas of the Sabha to prepare for crowning Satyavrata king. He sent his soldiers out to the far corners of the land to fetch the water for the sun's abhisheka from the ocean and the sacred rivers. When the holy water arrived, Aruna sent messengers to all the kingdoms to invite his friends, the other kings, to attend the sun's coronation. In some surprise, for they knew that this prince had once been banished, those kshatras arrived in Aruna's city. With ceremony, Satyavrata was crowned king of the house of the sun. When this was done, Aruna and his son gave away lavish lands and wealth to the brahmanas who had sat over the ceremonies. Then with his wife, Aruna turned his back on his kingdom and retired to the forest and became a vanaprastha, and performed tapasya in an ashram on the banks of the Ganges. In time, he realized the immortal Brahman within himself, and leaving his body, ascended into heaven, where he shone like another sun beside Indra. Meanwhile, Satyvrata ruled the kingdom wisely and with Dharma in his scepter. He was just and generous, and there was no better king in all of the land. In time, he was married and had a brilliant son, whom he named Harishchandra, whose Dharma would also be legend one day. However, Satyvrata always had an eccentric strain in his character. Once he was seized by a strange and irresistible ambition. He wanted to rise into the Devi Loka, the realm of the gods, in his human body. At first, he tried to dismiss the weird desire, telling himself that he was slipping back into the old spoiled ways of his youth. But it would not leave him in peace and obsessed him day and night, his waking and sleep. When he could not bear it anymore, he went to Vasishtha in his forest ashram and confessed his extraordinary preoccupation. He said, "Try as I will, I cannot banish the obsession from my heart. Guru, you have the power to send me into Devaloka in this human body. I have no peace but dream of being there and listening to the Gandharva's song in the Nandan. I beg you, Muni, help me." But Vasishtha said, "Who can live in Devaloka in a mortal body? Why, even the dead only live in heaven as long as their punyas last. Then they are born again into the world." Satyvrata, how can a mortal man enjoy the apsaras or listen to the Gandharva songs that are like Amrit? Be patient, and you shall indeed enjoy Devaloka when you die. The king had always held a grudge against Vasishtha, especially after he cursed him that last time. Now he turned on the rishi and cried, "If you won't help me, haughty one, I will find another Brahmana who will." And he was about to walk out of the Muni's presence when Vasishtha cursed him again. "Evil king, your heart is still full of darkness and vanities. Be a Chandala from now, for you have the spirit of one. And I am your guru. Your guru, curse you, that you will never find Devaloka for yourself, not even when you die." At once, Satyvrata found his body had turned into the black Chandalas. His features were coarse, and his red eyes bulged from his crude face. His golden ornaments had turned to base iron ones. The sweet sandal paste had turned into, smelt like excrement, and his skin was thickened and rough. With a howl, the king fled from Vasishtha's presence. He ran through the jungle, his eyes streaming like a man who had demons after him. He could not go back to his city now, for even his wife would not recognize him or his son. The people would surely beat him if he told them he was the king. He thought it was better to die than to live again in exile in a wretched body such as this. But then he knew that a suicide would be born, he'd be born as a Chandala again. So there was no escape for him, even in killing himself. Wisdom dawned on the king. He told himself, "I must suffer for whatever I've done, for there is no escape in 100 lives from the fruits of one's karma. I will live in a forester's life near some rishi's ashram and visit the sacred tirtha of the earth. I will worship the Devi more fervently than ever, and perhaps I will be forgiven my sins and even realize my dream of rising into Devaloka in this gross body." The king began living beside the Ganga in tapasya as a penitent. But word got out about how he had been cursed, and his son Harishchandra heard of it. In grief, that prince sent his ministers to his father in the wilderness. They came and said, "Lord, we know who you are. Your son Harishchandra begs you to return home with us. We and all your subjects will implore Vasishtha to withdraw his curse, or at least favor you with a blessing, and your anguish will melt away like snow on the Himalayas when the summer comes." But the king, who is now the Chandala, said to them, "Go back to the city and tell my son that I will not return. Make Harishchandra king in my place and serve him well." The ministers wept and begged him again, but their king would not relent. He insisted he would remain beside the river in atonement, and they must return to Ayodhya. And so they did, and on an auspicious day crowned the noble Harishchandra king of the house of the sun. And Harishchandra ruled with Dharma in his father's name, and the kingdom prospered. Said Vedavyasa to King Janamejaya. Jai Mahamaya ki jai, Vishveshwari Mata ki jai, Bole Baba ki jai.